Atlas is one of the most simple yet fun frames in the game. So today we're going to overcomplicate him with some enjoyable setups and builds, some meta and some off meta, and at the same time provide the necessary breakdown to his kit so those looking to give him a try have a broader understanding of how he can be used. Atlas has two passives. The first is knockdown immunity when his feet are on the ground. This is one of the most convenient passives in the game. Sure, if you get caught in the air you'll suffer a knockdown, but considering most of Atlas's gameplay loop takes place on foot, this is a great replacement for Prime Sure-Footed. His second passive, although not listed as one, is his rubble mechanic. Enemies that Atlas turns into stone via the likes of Petrify, Recasting Rumblers, and the Path of Statues augment will drop rubble when killed. Rubble will heal Atlas when picked up if his health is not full, but when his health is full, these rubble drops can be picked up to stack armor, up to a total of 1500 bonus. Many players overlook this mechanic as it's actually very easy to proc and sustain if you are using the likes of Petrify or Path of Statues. It's essentially free heals and armor for when using his abilities in the correct loop. His passive also has an augment called Rubble Heap. When above a 1400 rubble threshold, your first skill, Landslide, becomes free to cast and becomes 2 times faster with 2 times more damage. Not a must-have by any means, but no doubt one of the best augments in the game, and you may as well use it on most of your builds. His first ability is his exalted weapon, Landslide, or his exalted fists. Atlas charges forward at a target with an explosive punch which can be repeated 3 times in a combo for a radius and damage increase. The third punch will also knock back the target. The energy cost is also reduced with each hit of the skill. Landslide also acts as a primary form of survival for Atlas, as he is rendered invincible during the animation. It will possess its own combo counter and scale based on its equipped mods, but due to not being a stance based exalted, certain mods cannot be equipped, such as the Tennokai mods for example. For its base stats, it sports a 35% crit chance, 2 times crit damage multiplier, and a 15% status chance with a full lean into impact damage. And yes, the explosion radius is affected by both melee range mods and power range. The augment is called Path of Statues, and it leaves behind a trail of rocks, which when enemies step into, they turn into stone. This is the same effect applied by both Petrify and Rumblers, thus holding enemies in place, increasing their damage and vulnerability, and dropping rubble. Atlas's second ability is Dog Shit. Atlas's third ability is called Petrify. Tectonics is his second skill, in which bro just drops a pile of rocks and calls it a wall. It has 1500 base health, with bonus additional health equal to 500% of Atlas's armor. Upon cast, it is invulnerable for 4 seconds, while it absorbs damage that is converted into its own total health. After this invulnerability phase, damage will be redistributed to nearby enemies in the form of slash damage, which scales with strength. Sounds awesome, right? It's absolute dick. The slash damage has no status, so it can't proc any bleeds, and the DPS is even bad against flesh. You can also tap to send it rolling forward in a boulder, but the damage is pitiful, even when combined with Petrify to increase its velocity, distance and damage. The Tectonic Fracture augment allows you to place down more of these walls at the cost of the boulder roll feature. This skill is arse, and outside of fun gimmicks, it's the best subsume option. Petrify is his third. Atlas will turn enemies to stone where he is aiming in a 60-degree field of view. Frozen targets will be 50% more vulnerable to damage, and the freeze duration can be extended with duration mods. You can't refresh this freeze duration while the targets are frozen, but once they break free you can reapply the stone. Enemies killed while frozen will drop rubble for health and armor, but if killed by Landslide will drop bonus rubble on top. You can buff the damage of Tectonics, nobody cares, and casting Petrify of your Rumblers will restore their health by 100%. The augment Orgaze will scan enemies into your codex and increase their loot drop chance by a value of 25%. That's also affected by strength. We'll be using this in one of the builds today. Atlas's fourth and final ability is his Rumblers. Atlas spawns in 2 rock golems that fight by your side. The initial cast will also petrify nearby enemies. The health and armor of the golems scale with not only your power strength, but also your health and armor mods equipped on your Atlas. And power strength will also change the size of your Rumblers. They can whack and throw rocks, but the damage is pretty awful. A self-destruct option is also available on recast to do some useless AoE damage, but also drop some rubble for you to pick up. They are immune to status effects, but not staggers for whatever reason, and as stated, Petrify can heal them for 100% of their health. When encountering nullifier bubbles, the health of the golems will gradually decay inside of the bubble. Unfortunately, the rumblers are only good for pulling enemy aggro, but when it comes to augments it becomes much more interesting. Titanic Rumbler will spawn one big golem with a huge buff to its HP and damage. You can also recast to cause a 15-meter knockdown, but that's not particularly useful. I will say that you can make some pretty funny summon builds with this mod, but in my opinion, it's just too silly and gimmicky to warrant me including in today's builds. It can be enjoyable for some meme setups, but it's not going to break any new ground even when paired with some of the best helmets. However, the second augment for his fourth skill is called Rumbled. It turns Atlas into a Rumbler with Overguard for HP. This does limit mobility by removing jumping, but luckily that synergizes with his grounded knockdown mechanic. But the real star of the show is the ability to throw rocks in this Rumbler form, as these rocks scale with your landslide mods. We'll also be covering a build centered around this today. Atlas is the definition of a brawler frame. He may be a bit one-dimensional compared to how versatile frames are nowadays, but I believe him to be one of the game's best and most efficient DPS classes. Instant room nukes at the press of one button, and solid scaling tankiness with his health and armor, not to mention his iframes. He is the perfect example of how a simple design can be effective even when a couple of his skills are lackluster. As per usual with these videos, I prefer to start with one of the less interesting setups for those looking for efficiency and damage, and then I follow up after with some more creative and fun builds for players craving some enjoyment factor. So don't immediately resort to TikTok attention span brain like this guy and assume that all I'm showing off is the copy and paste meta helmet brain rot. We got some fun setups on this channel, alright? But before we get into the builds, we need to talk about Shards and Focus. As for companions, I'm going to talk about them with the Atlas builds, as they're a bit more specific in the builds and the synergies. I'm choosing to go full overkill with 5 Talforge purple shards for more crit damage. Because we're using Arcane Battery with today's builds, we'll also get the increased value from Energy Max, so our melee damage is even more excessive. Are these remotely necessary? Of course not. But increasing your primary form of damage never hurts anyone in this game. As for Focus, as of current, we can forego Naramont due to being able to equip Dexterity Arcanes on our Arc Guns now. So that way we get a large increase to our combo duration while being able to use Madurai for power strength and casting speed. But if you don't have the Dexterity Arcanes, you probably are just better off using Naramon for that infinite combo. But let's start with the big funny numbers and focus on the logical option of Raffle Advance to get it out the way. As most of you know, Raffle will teleport you forward, granting a huge buff to your melee crit chance, and this also applies to your Exalted Fists. By no means is it necessary to make quick work of enemies, as Landslide holds up just fine on its own, but who doesn't enjoy the big funny red numbers and guaranteed one-hit kills even at higher levels? And yes, we are subsuming off tectonics with every build today. Starting off with the Atlas and Landslide build, Path of Statues and Rubble Heap are the choices of augments. Even though Landslide becomes free when Rubble Heap is over 1400 armor, our other skills are still important to use frequently, so Equilibrium makes an appearance with Arcane Battery for our energy sustain, and with a few pickups of Rubble, your armor will not only bolster Battery, but also get you over the 500 energy max crit buff from your Violet Shards. Our Exilus is optional, as luckily we don't need Prime Sure-Footed, Prime Continuity for duration, Blind Rage, Umbral Intensify, and Growing Power for strength, and Overextended and Arc and Stretch for range. Arc and Stretch can also be procced by a Viral Influence Landslide build. Landslide is also getting damage boosted by Arcane Fury, which can be replaced with something like Arcane Avenger if you feel like it. And of course, plenty of crit on our fists and stacking primed reach with our power range for nuking rooms. You can run into trouble at much higher levels, but for the most part, Steel Path content is going to be absorbed by your iframes from your first skill and the armor and health you do have. As for our companion choice this time round, the Nautilus is stepping in to not only provide grouping, but also health orbs with Synth Deconstruct, and a crit damage buff with Tenacious Bond. The Prisma Burst Laser is also here to get us over the required crit chance on our Tenacious Bond mod. As you can see, there is not too much of a lean into survivability with this setup, as we are mostly relying on the frequency of our punches to be immortal. Our next setup is one that was formerly unconventional, but ever since the Exalted rework, it's actually far easier to set up and way stronger than it was before. Atlas's Rumbled augment is the focus here. As already stated, you can throw rocks in this form at the cost of some mobility, and while the overguard gain seems decent, it gets chewed through rapidly at higher levels, so we are opting for a different method of survival this time. While we are slinging nuclear pebbles, we will be invisible via either our choice of companion or helmet. Personally, I use the Shade with its cloak ability. The Horus Kubro also offers the same option, And when throwing these rocks, your invis won't be broken as it counts as an ability cast rather than a weapon attack. This not only keeps us alive, but enables the use of Arcane Crepuscular for more strength and crit damage when invisible. If you'd rather obtain invis from an ability, Evade is actually somewhat viable due to the rocks being able to headshot. However, this is a little tedious and irritating to do repeatedly because the enemy density and hitboxes make it kinda tricky. My choice of subsume directly synergizes with my choice of element for the rocks, which by the way, I forgot to equip the correct element in the footage as I was using viral instead of gas like a dumbass. There's meant to be big gas procs going off in the footage. What a bell end. Ensnare is a strong grouping tool which, if you are using Evade, instead can be supplemented with the Nautilus like before. Building our landslide for gas will have the rock throw nuking any horde of enemies that you could have grouped up with Ensnare or a Nautilus. As for the build, returning mods and arcanes include Battery, Prime Continuity, Equilibrium, and Arc on Stretch, Rumbled of course, and then for strength we have Transient Fortitude, Augur Secret, Precision Intensify, and Power Drift. Corrosive Projection for some enemy armor reduction, and Rolling Guard for a safety net when your invis may deactivate. On our landslide, either gas or blast will work with the grouping, and we've removed Prime Reach for the Condition Overload mod as influence is covering for the range on our projectiles. Moving on to the Shade setup, it's almost identical to the Nautilus build including Tenacious Bond and Synth Deconstruct. But Manifold Bond is also here to proc our Shade invis more often, thus keeping us safer. The Pebbles build is arguably the most fun of the available Atlas playstyles despite its lack of mobility, long range DPS, and the equally impressive damage output to his standard landslide. 100% worth giving a shot if you have the invis options to pick from. The third setup today is also a little off meta, but at the same time can use pretty much any helmet you wish, as the focus is on the Strain mod set. So before you complain at my helmet choice, okay? The focus isn't on it specifically. We're using the Strain mod set to lean more into a health tank playstyle, but also having a solid balance of crit damage in our landslide. The set spawns cysts that erupt into maggots every 25 seconds. Strain Consume grants us a slight increase to our max health as well as some health regen. Strain Infection grants 20% melee crit damage increase per active cyst. Strain Erupt will have the maggots explode for 4% of the enemy's total health in corrosive damage. And finally, Strain Fever will increase your helmet charger damage by 40% per cyst. So this setup is granting us both increases to our survivability and damage across the board. My choice of subsume is unfortunately Nourish here, as it's going to grant us energy and viral damage, but it's by no means required, and we are subsuming it over Tectonics like every other build. Mods and arcanes that make a return include Arcane Fury and Battery, Prime Continuity, Blind Rage, Power Drift, and Stretch. Strain Fever on Atlas with Steel Charge for melee damage, Rubble Heap is our choice of Augment, and Umbral Fiber with Umbral Vitality to give Strain some more usage. Strain Infection on our landslide for the set and its huge crit buff. It's worth noting that equipping this on your landslide doesn't seem to contribute to the set bonus as seen in the UI, so to ensure that it does, I also have it equipped on my melee weapon. And we are going with the gas setup again to combine with Viral from Nourish, and to obtain this gas, we have Volcanic Edge and Proton Snap. Proton Snap will give you a toxin damage buff that combines with other elements equipped, as long as you wall latch for 2 seconds every 20 seconds. But it will also grant you an additive 50% status chance to increase the amount of gas you proc. This is extremely strong and a satisfying switch up from the regular lack of elements being procced by your 1. We are also dropping out melee influence in our arcane slot for exposure for a huge corrosive damage buff on ability cast. So with everything together, we are doing gas, viral, and corrosive all at once. As for our companion, we are of course using the helmet charger with the Strain set, with Strain Eruption on the helmet and Fever on his melee weapon. Easily one of the most underrated companions in terms of damage, especially when the Strain set is buffing it. The most enjoyable part of this build for me is seeing those huge gas procs after setting off Proton Snap. High armor and health values with scaling crit and status makes this arguably the most versatile setup in the video. Our fourth and final build takes a turn to one of Atlas's most useful tools in the form of his Ore Gaze augment. Ore Gaze, as stated during the ability breakdown, will increase the drop chance of loot from enemies killed while stoned.
¿Quieres?
So this is our looter setup, and in order to maximize efficiency, we are combining it with Thorough Strike as our helmet. Thorough Strike will strip enemies' armor in a swipe where the player aims. So the idea is to swipe a group of enemies that you have frozen with Petrify, then punch away everyone in a single attack for a healthy pool of loot. Not mind-blowing by any means, but considering every Atlas build is capable of shoving Grineer noses down through their arse cracks, I'd say having a rival frame to Necros is a solid addition. Here's how we set it up. All Gaze and Rubble Heap for our augments, Arcane Battery and Equilibrium, Prime Continuity, Transient Fortitude, Power Drift, Arc and Stretch and Augur Reach will make returns. Corrosive Projection is combined with our Power Strength to achieve full strip on Tharos Strike. Tharos Lethality can be subbed in for more crit damage by replacing Augur Reach, but it's by no means required. And we are making some room for Redirection and Arcane Aegis for some scaling survivability, which is also optional. The Landslide build is also the same as the Raffle Advanced build, so we are setting up for Viral Influence, which makes sense when we are stripping this much armor. And to group up enemies for tighter loot pools, we are bringing in the Nautilus once again with the Tenacious Bond and Synth Deconstruct setup. And that's all of my current Atlas setups for you to try. He's been one of my favourite frames for a very long time, and it feels great to finally use him without a stat stick. If I ever want to turn off my brain and not manage a set of skills like Lavos, Atlas becomes one of my go-to frames to just run through missions with one button, but without the reduction in entertainment. If you have enjoyed today's video or found it useful, please feel free to like and sub. And if you want to see more of the content I make outside of Warframe, I recommend checking out my third channel, Haze, where we do variety video game essays of high quality. We'll greatly appreciate a sub over there too. I appreciate all the support, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.